Welcome back to Secret Speaks. How has your day been? Now let's uncover the mystery hidden in today's story. On Christmas morning, the people I loved most looked at me as if I were a stranger. My son's words cut deeper than the winter air when he told his children I was not part of their family, and his wife's smile only sharpened the wound. I am Eleanor Hayes, 60 years old, a widow who gave away years of savings and pieces of her soul believing I was building a legacy. That night I realized I was nothing but a wallet in their eyes, and from that moment I knew my love, my house, and even my will would no longer belong to them. The scent of cinnamon and roasted turkey filled the kitchen as I slid the last tray of cookies onto the cooling rack. My red sweater clung a little too warmly to my skin, but I wore it every Christmas. Thomas had once said it made me look festive, and even though he had been gone for nearly 15 years, I still put it on each December like armor. Outside, Sacramento's winter light fell pale through the frosted windows, illuminating the garland I had strung around the banister and the stockings that hung neatly above the fireplace. I checked the clock. Nearly noon. Any minute now they would pull into the driveway. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and tried to steady the flutter in my chest. For weeks, I had been polishing the silver that hadn't seen the light of day since last Christmas, ironing the tablecloth setting out the china Thomas and I had received on our wedding day. I wanted everything to be perfect, maybe foolishly believing that if the table gleamed and the food impressed, I might feel whole again for a few hours. The crunch of tires on the driveway made me straighten. I hurried to the door just as Michael stepped in without knocking, already scrolling through his phone. At 34, my son carried himself with the distracted arrogance of a man who thought every text or email might be the one to change his life. "Smells good, Mom," he muttered, not looking up. Behind him came Vanessa, perfectly composed in a cream sweater and dark jeans, the kind of effortless polish I could never match. Her smile was tight, her wave perfunctory. She brushed past me like I was an acquaintance rather than the woman who had raised her husband. The children at least ran to me with genuine joy. Lily, 9 years old and brimming with excitement, wrapped her arms around my waist. "Grandma, can I open my present now?" Noah, 2 years older and more reserved, hung back, but smiled shyly, clutching the book I had bought him last week. Soon the house buzzed with the sound of rustling wrapping paper and children's laughter. For a moment, as Lily squealed over the art set and Noah carefully examined the new baseball glove, I let myself feel the warmth of the holiday. This was why I worked so hard, why I spent late nights baking and decorating, why I emptied savings accounts to keep traditions alive. At 2:00, I ushered them to the dining room. The table gleamed, the turkey was golden and steaming. The cranberry sauce gleamed like rubies in the crystal bowl. I watched as everyone took their seats. Michael kept one hand on his phone, tapping between bites. Vanessa delicately picked at her food, commenting on carbohydrates as though they were poisons. The children ate quickly, eager to return to their toys. "This is delicious, Mom," Michael said absently, the same way one might thank a waiter for refilling a glass of water. I smiled and poured more gravy, swallowing the lump that rose in my throat. I wanted so badly for them to see the love in every dish, the care in every detail. I wanted them to remember me as more than the woman who paid bills and kept the house standing. As I cleared plates in the kitchen, I caught fragments of their voices drifting from the living room. Vanessa's tone was firm, almost impatient. "We should tell her now." "Maybe after dessert," Michael replied. "Tell me what I thought," pausing with a dish still damp in my hands. When I returned with the pumpkin pie, Silence hung heavy. They waited until the children were focused on whipped cream before Michael cleared his throat. "Mom, we need to tell you something." I set my fork down. "What is it?" Vanessa leaned in with a polished smile. "Nothing's wrong. We just wanted you to know about our spring break plans." "That sounds lovely," I said carefully. Michael avoided my eyes. "We've already booked it. We're taking the kids to a resort in Mexico." I nodded, waiting for the invitation that never came. The silence after his words cut deeper than if he had simply said no. The conversation drifted elsewhere. Lily chattered about a friend's birthday party, and I kept smiling, pretending my heart hadn't cracked a little more. Later, as they prepared to leave, Lily bounded up to me, her eyes wide with excitement. "Grandma, aren't you excited about our trip? The resort has 3 pools and a kids' club." The room froze. Vanessa stiffened, her face flushed, while Michael finally looked up from his phone. Noah set down his Lego piece. "Emma," Vanessa snapped, "Grandma isn't coming with us." "Why not?" Lily asked, her small voice cutting through the silence. Michael shifted uncomfortably, then spoke with the tone of a man explaining something obvious to a child. "Because, sweetheart, this trip is for our family. Just our immediate family." "But Grandma is family," Lily insisted, still clinging to my arm. Michael's jaw tightened. "Grandma isn't part of our family in that way." The words landed like a slap. For a second, I could not breathe. Vanessa added quickly, "What your dad means is that this trip is just for Mommy, Daddy, you, and Noah. Grandma has her own life. My own life." As if the life I had built around them, the house I maintained for their visits, the holidays I planned around their schedules, meant nothing. Of course, I heard myself say, my voice steady, even as my chest burned. "You 4 have a wonderful time." They left soon after, the children hugging me tight, Vanessa murmuring a perfunctory, "Thank you, Michael," already back on his phone. When the door closed and silence filled the house, I stood in the living room surrounded by remnants of wrapping paper and the scent of roasted turkey. I lowered myself into Thomas's old armchair, the one that still creaked under my weight, and sat very still. The echo of Michael's words circled in my mind, cruel in their simplicity. Not family, not in that way. The tree twinkled in the corner, the stockings hung untouched, the house heavy with absence. I folded my hands in my lap and let the quiet seep into me, knowing something inside me had shifted forever. The quiet pressed in on me long after their car pulled away, the sound of tires fading into the night. I sat alone in the dim glow of the Christmas tree, the lights blinking like they were mocking me, cheerful in a house that felt suddenly hollow. My hands rested on the arms of Thomas's chair, worn smooth from years of his touch, and I let the ache spread through me. Every Christmas since he died had carried a weight, but I carried it willingly because I believed I still had a family to gather around me. I thought if I filled the house with warmth and food and light, I could keep some part of him alive for Michael and for the children. Now the truth settled over me like a heavy blanket. To them, I was not the heart of the family. I was an extra place setting a convenience, someone they could dismiss with a single sentence. I closed my eyes and was back in the first Christmas after Thomas passed in 2010. Michael was only 20 at the time, quiet and lost. I remember the way he had sat at this same table, pushing food around his plate until I told him gently to eat. That year, I had overcompensated, buying him gifts I could not really afford, paying off the last of his college tuition from my savings because he said he was too distracted by grief to think about money. I told myself it was what Thomas would have wanted. The following years blurred together with sacrifice. In 2012, Michael had come to me brimming with excitement about a startup idea, promising that investors were lined up if he could only show some family backing. I took a second mortgage on the house Thomas and I had bought, $60,000 gone in an instant. The business folded within months, but Michael never mentioned repayment. Instead, he told me that investments were risks, and this one just had not worked out. By 2015, he was engaged to Vanessa, a young woman from San Francisco with polished manners and expensive tastes. Her parents promised to pay for most of the wedding, but Michael still came to me asking for help with the honeymoon and a down payment on a house in Davis. I withdrew $20,000 for their European honeymoon and another $25,000 for the house. He called it a loan. I called it love. When Lily was born in 2016, Vanessa insisted she would never trust a daycare center. I left teaching earlier than I had planned, forfeiting years of pension, so I could watch the baby 3 days a week. I told myself it was a gift, but now I see it for what it was. Free childcare disguised as bonding time. Then came Noah in 2018, and the cycle began again. Money for diapers, money for formula money when Vanessa's car broke down, $40,000 more when they moved into a bigger house, $15,000 when Michael needed a new SUV because his credit was too poor to get a loan on his own. Each time I told myself it was temporary, that once they were stable, they would repay me. Now I sat in the quiet house I had kept afloat on my own for 15 years, and the question rose sharp and cold. If I was not their family, then what was I to them? A bank account, a safety net, an open wallet. My throat burned, and I pressed my hand to my mouth to keep from sobbing aloud. The children's voices echoed in my mind, especially Lily's small voice, bright with innocence, asking why I was not going on their trip. She had not meant harm, but she had pulled the truth into the light in front of everyone. They had tried to hush her, but it was too late. Out of the mouths of children come the truths adults work so hard to hide. I rose and wandered through the house, touching the frames on the mantel, the photographs of Christmases past, Michael at 10 years old, proudly holding the wooden sled Thomas had built him. Michael at 18, standing stiff in his graduation gown while I wiped tears from my eyes. The young man who once clung to me had grown into someone who saw me as little more than a source of money. Vanessa's polished smile haunted me. She had never once called me mom, never once reached for my hand, and now she had said what Michael could not bring himself to say. Not family. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen table littered with crumbs and half-empty plates. I stared at the chair where Michael had sat distracted by his phone while I carved the turkey and felt a surge of anger cut through the grief. I had built my life around him, bent every plan to fit his needs, and he had cast me aside with 4 words. The clock ticked toward midnight as I began gathering the dishes, stacking them in the sink. My body moved through the motions of cleaning while my mind replayed the moment over and over. Lily's voice, Vanessa's sharp correction, Michael's final blow. I dried my hands and stood by the window, watching the cold night settle over the garden I had tended with my own hands. The garden where Thomas and I had once planted roses, believing they would grow around us as we grew old together. The house was silent, but inside me a storm raged. The image of Lily clinging to my arm replayed her confusion clear as she said, "Grandma is family." For one brief second, I had felt seen, defended. Then Michael had crushed it, declaring that I was not. That truth burned deeper than anything Vanessa could have said. I knew then that the holidays I had spent laboring over meals, the money I had poured into their lives, the time I had sacrificed, were invisible to them. I was not a mother in their eyes. I was a service. The wine glass trembled in my hand as I set it down on the counter. The room seemed to close in around me, every ornament, every garland, every shining plate whispering of years I could never reclaim. My body felt heavy as stone, but my mind sharpened with clarity. This was not just about one Christmas. It was about every choice I had made since Thomas died, every dollar I had given, every piece of myself I had handed over without question. Outside, a neighbor's house glittered with lights, their laughter carrying faintly across the street. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass of the window and let the tears finally come. I cried for Thomas, for the woman I used to be, for the family I thought I had. I cried until the tears ran dry and only exhaustion remained. When I finally climbed the stairs to bed, the house groaned with silence. I pulled the covers over me and stared into the dark. Lily's words echoed in my head, innocent and unfiltered, cutting through the lies. Grandma is family, and Michael's reply heavy and final. Not in that way. I turned on my side and clutched the pillow, whispering to the empty room. Then what am I? What have I been all these years? The answer, though unspoken, lingered bitterly in the dark. A wallet, an account, never truly family. Sleep came slowly, filled with restless dreams of empty tables and locked doors. And when morning broke over Sacramento, I woke with swollen eyes and a hollow chest, knowing something inside me had cracked beyond repair. Morning light crept across the floorboards of the kitchen as I sat with a cup of coffee gone cold in my hands. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that did not soothe, but pressed on my ears until I felt smothered. I pushed the mug aside and went to the office, a small room off the hallway where Thomas used to do the bills. The file cabinet stood against the wall, gray and unremarkable, but I knew what waited inside. I pulled the top drawer open and tugged out the folders, each neatly labeled in my handwriting. Mortgage, insurance, college loans, business expenses. My fingers trembled as I spread them across the desk. For years, I had avoided looking too closely at the numbers, telling myself that family did not keep score. But now I needed to see the truth written in black and white. The first folder I opened held receipts from 2012. Michael had been 22, brimming with ambition, convinced he was destined to be the next tech entrepreneur. He had called me late at night, his voice feverish with excitement. He just needed a show of faith, he said. Investors were waiting, but he needed family backing. I had gone to the bank, signed the paperwork for a second mortgage on the house Thomas and I had worked so hard for. $60,000. I slid the statement across the desk, the numbers stark and merciless. The business collapsed within 8 months, but Michael never once brought up repayment. The next folder held invoices from a travel agency dated 2015, $20,000 for a honeymoon across Europe. The photographs they sent me afterward showed them smiling in Paris, sipping wine in Tuscany, wandering through castles in Germany. I remembered Vanessa's breezy voice on the phone, thanking me like I had done her a small favor rather than emptied a savings account. Another sheet caught my eye. $25,000 transferred for the down payment on their starter home in Davis. Michael had promised it was only temporary. He had promised that as soon as his career stabilized, he would pay me back. I traced the ink with my finger, remembering how hopeful I had been, how proud to think I was helping them build a foundation. I kept digging, each page another wound. $40,000 to help them move into a larger house in 2018 because Vanessa wanted more space and better schools for the children. $15,000 for an SUV when Michael's credit failed him and the dealership required a co-signer. There were smaller checks too, $400 here for a new furnace, $1,000 there for daycare supplies, countless grocery runs, and utility bills. None of it recorded formally, all of it taken for granted. I sat back the pile of paper spread before me like evidence in a trial. My pen scratched across a notepad as I added the figures. $70,000 for the startup, $20,000 for the honeymoon, $40,000 for the first house, another $40,000 for the upgrade, $15,000 for the SUV. The total stared back at me, $185,000. My chest tightened and I dropped the pen. That was not a few favors. That was a lifetime of work. That was Thomas's years in construction, my decades in classrooms, every extra shift, every careful choice. It was the retirement we had dreamed of, the vacations we never took, the security he had hoped to leave behind for me. I buried my face in my hands and wept hot tears soaking my palms. This money should have been our legacy. It should have been what I left to my grandchildren, a testament to the lives Thomas and I had built together. Instead, it was gone, consumed by Michael's endless requests and Vanessa's expectations. They had treated it as theirs by right, never once considering that it was my future too. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my sweater and looked again at the papers. For 15 years, I had told myself it was love, that this was what mothers did. But staring at the mountain of receipts, I could no longer hide from the truth. I had not been a cherished mother. I had been a lender without interest, a safety net, without boundaries, a bank account they could withdraw from whenever they wished. The realization struck so hard, I felt the air leave my lungs. My son did not see me as family. He saw me as money. Vanessa had given the words voice, but Michael had let them stand. In that dining room, he had not defended me, had not even flinched. He had agreed. The clock on the wall ticked steady and slow, but inside me something snapped. I gathered the folders back into the drawer, my hand shaking as I slammed it shut. I could not keep pretending. Not after seeing the numbers in front of me. Not after hearing my son say I was not part of his family. I sat at the desk until the sun shifted and the light angled across the floor. The silence in the house no longer felt like grief. It felt like judgment, like the walls themselves were whispering all the ways I had failed to see what was right in front of me. For 15 years, I had been nothing more than their bank. When I finally stood, my legs ached from sitting too long. I carried the notepad with the total scribbled across the top and placed it on the mantel beside Thomas's photograph. His smile looked down at me, steady and kind. My voice cracked as I whispered into the empty room. I am sorry, Thomas. I should have protected what you left us. The words hung heavy in the air, and I knew there was no going back. The truth had been written in numbers and spoken aloud by my own son. I had been their bank, not their family, and the cost had been everything Thomas and I had built. I closed my eyes and let the weight of it settle, knowing the time had come to decide what I would do next. The last night of the year crept in heavy with silence, the kind that made the walls of the house seem closer than they were. Outside, fireworks cracked in the distance, muffled by the winter air. I had made no plans, no champagne chilled, no television countdown waiting in the background. I sat with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, staring at the darkened garden through the glass. The phone rang just after 10. I let it ring twice before I picked up my heart, already knowing who it was. "Hey, Mom." Michael's voice came through bright and hurried, the way he always sounded when he wanted something. "Happy almost New Year." Hello, Michael, I said, bracing myself. Listen, I hate to bother you, but we've got a situation. Vanessa's car broke down. Something with the transmission. The mechanic says it's going to run about $4,000 to fix. I closed my eyes, the number sharp and familiar. Always a round figure, always an emergency. 4,000 this time, 15 the last 20 before that. Michael, that car is barely 2 years old. Yeah, but it was used when we bought it. You know how these things go. Anyway, we're strapped right now with bills, and with the Mexico trip coming up, it's been tight. I was hoping maybe you could help us out. We'll pay you back as soon as I get my bonus in March. The papers in the drawer flashed in my mind. $185,000. Receipts and checks and bank slips that marked every time I had said yes. I felt my hand tighten on the receiver. When was the last time you paid me back for anything, Michael? There was a pause, the kind that revealed everything. What do you mean, Mom? I mean exactly what I said. Tell me the last time you returned $1 of what I've given you. His tone shifted, defensive, almost offended. Mom, we've talked about this. Money has been tight, and it's not like you need it right. You've got the house, your pension, your savings. My savings that I have been draining for years, I thought. My house that I mortgaged twice for you. Michael, I said slowly, you called me on New Year's Eve to ask for $4,000 for a car repair while planning a vacation to Mexico. That's different, he snapped. The vacation is already paid for. With what money? There was silence again, only his breathing on the other end. Mom, I don't understand why you're being like this. It's not like you to keep track of every penny. The words cut sharper than any insult. It's not like you to keep track, as though my role was to give endlessly without memory or expectation. I'm sorry, Michael. I can't help you this time. What? Why not? Because I need to start taking care of my own future instead of funding yours. His voice rose sharp with disbelief. That's selfish? We're talking about Vanessa's transportation to work. This isn't a luxury, this is a necessity. Selfish. The word rang in my ears. I had sacrificed nearly $200,000 years of work and security, and now I was selfish for saying no once. Michael, I have to go. Wait. Mom, listen. Maybe we don't need the full 4. Maybe 2. Just enough to get started. We can figure the rest out later. Good night, Michael. I pressed the phone back into its cradle, my hands trembling. For a long moment, I just sat there staring at the shadows moving across the wall as another firework burst outside. My chest felt hollow, but beneath the ache, there was something steadier. A line had been drawn, one I had avoided for too long. The phone rang again minutes later. I didn't answer. It rang a second time, then a third. Finally, it went to voicemail. His voice came through tight with frustration. Mom, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this isn't fair. You're punishing us for something, and I don't even know what we did wrong. Vanessa's really upset. She thought she could count on you. We all did. I guess we were wrong. The message ended with a click. I replayed it once, listening carefully. Not we love you, not we appreciate you, not we're sorry. Just, we thought we could count on you. The tears threatened again, but I forced myself to breathe evenly. If I died tomorrow, I realized with a clarity that chilled me, he would grieve the loss of access to me. He would think first of what I believed was owed to him. I rose and walked to the mantel where Thomas's picture still stood. His eyes, captured in a photograph from a family vacation long ago, looked kind and steady. I touched the frame with a trembling hand. You worked so hard, Thomas. You broke your back in construction for years to build something secure for us, and I gave it all away because I thought I was helping our son." My voice cracked in the stillness. "He doesn't see me as family anymore, just a wallet." The clock struck midnight in the other room, fireworks erupting louder now, neighbors cheering as they toasted a new year. I stood in my quiet house wrapped in shadows and silence, and knew that for me, the year ahead would not be like the ones before. Something had ended with that phone call. Something I could never put back together. The morning after New Year's felt strangely calm, as if the air itself had thinned. I moved through the kitchen in silence, setting my mug of coffee down untouched. The thought that had haunted me all night would not leave. If I stayed here in this house that had swallowed so much of me, Michael would keep calling, keep asking, keep draining. The walls held too many echoes of arguments, too many receipts of sacrifice. I opened the drawer again and looked at the notepad with the total written across it. 185,000. The number glared back at me like a sentence. I closed the drawer quickly, picked up the phone, and dialed a number I had not called in years. Patricia O'Donnell answered on the second ring, her voice brisk and cheerful. "Margaret," she said, then corrected herself quickly. "Eleanor. How are you?" I hesitated for a moment, then forced the words out. "Patricia, I was wondering if you could give me an idea of what my house might be worth right now." There was a pause, then her tone brightened. "Of course. The market in Sacramento is strong, especially in your neighborhood. Would you like me to come by for an evaluation?" "Yes," I said, my hand gripping the receiver. The sooner the better. By that afternoon, Patricia was walking through the rooms with her tablet, tapping notes and snapping photos. I followed her silently, my arms crossed, as she praised the refinished floors, the updated kitchen, the garden that had matured into something people paid extra for. "Eleanor," she said finally, lowering the tablet, "this house could easily go for $1 million, maybe 1.05 with the right buyers." The number hit me harder than I expected. My knees felt weak, and I sank into one of the dining chairs. 1.05 million. Twice what Thomas and I had paid, more than I had ever dreamed of holding in my hands. Patricia misread my shock for hesitation. "It is a seller's market. If you list now, you could have offers within days." I nodded slowly, the room tilting slightly. All these years I had seen the house as an anchor, the place that tied me to Michael and the children, the last piece of Thomas's legacy. But now it shimmered in my mind as something else entirely. A way out. After Patricia left, I walked room to room looking at the house with new eyes. The wide porch where I had once rocked Lily to sleep. The staircase where Michael had sat after breaking his arm at 12, his face pale but brave. The kitchen Thomas had helped me remodel, his laughter ringing as we argued about backsplash tiles. Every corner held memory, but not all of them were kind. Some were heavy, suffocating, weighted with the knowledge of what I had given and what I had lost. That evening Michael called. His tone was lighter than on New Year's Eve, as though the argument had not happened. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. How are you?" I answered carefully, keeping my voice neutral. "I'm fine, Michael." There was a pause, then his voice shifted too casual. "You know, Vanessa was saying earlier it must feel like a lot to keep that big house going by yourself. She worries about you, Mom. All those stairs, all that space, it's a lot for one person." I felt the sting behind the words. Not concern, not love. A suggestion planted carefully that I was wasting something that could be theirs. I said nothing, and Michael pressed on. It just seems like a lot for you, that's all." I could hear Vanessa's voice in the background, sharp and quick. She didn't realize I could hear her clearly enough. "She's living in that house alone, Michael. It's ridiculous. You know she can't keep it up forever. She's going to realize it sooner or later." My jaw tightened. There it was again, the same message wrapped in different words. Not family, not wanted. A burden. I ended the call quickly, excusing myself with fatigue. When the line clicked dead, I stood in the kitchen, my hand shaking as I set the phone down. The house loomed around me, tall and still. For so long I had believed it kept me connected to them, that it proved my worth. But in that moment, I saw it for what it really was. To Michael and Vanessa, it was an asset waiting to be claimed. To me, it was a cage I had locked myself inside. I went to the mantel and looked again at Thomas's picture. For the first time in years, I spoke without hesitation. "Thomas, maybe it's time. Maybe this house should buy me freedom instead of chaining me to their need." The idea settled inside me with frightening clarity. The number Patricia had given me echoed in my head, steady and undeniable. 1.05 million. Enough to start over. Enough to disappear from their demands. I pressed my palm to the photograph, the glass cool against my skin, and let the truth fill me. I could sell this house. I could walk away. I did not have to remain their bank, their safety net, their ganang. When I turned off the lights that night, the house seemed different. Not the home where Thomas and I had built a life, not the shrine to family I had believed it to be. It was simply a structure, wood and plaster and brick, holding me in place. And for the first time, I saw a door standing open. 2 weeks after the new year, I was in the kitchen folding linens when the phone rang again. Michael's name lit up the screen, and for a long moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Against my better judgment, I picked up. "Hi, Mom." His voice came through overly bright, the way he sounded when he was gearing up to soften me. "I wanted to tell you some good news." "What kind of news?" I asked, steadying my tone. "We booked our spring break trip. Mexico. All-inclusive beach resort, kids club, the works. It's going to be amazing." I pressed my lips together, picturing Lily's eager face as she had chattered about swimming pools and kids clubs on Christmas Day. So that was settled then. The tickets were bought, the plans set, and of course I had never been part of the discussion. "That sounds nice," I said flatly. Michael hesitated, then added with false cheer, "We thought maybe you'd like to come along." The invitation landed like an afterthought, careless and hollow. I could hear the paper shuffle in the background, the distracted way he said it. It wasn't real, not from the heart. "No, thank you. I'll be busy with some things here at the house." There was silence. Just as I was about to hang up, I heard Vanessa's voice carry clearly in the background, sharp as a blade. "She doesn't need to come. Resorts like that aren't for people like her." The words slammed into me harder than I expected. Michael must have realized I had heard, because he muttered quickly, "Vanessa didn't mean anything by that. She's just stressed." But it was too late. I could still hear the faint echo of her laugh, low and mocking, as she spoke to him while their children were within earshot. Later that weekend, they came by to drop off some old clothes for the kids. Lily and Noah tumbled inside first, Lily bubbling with stories about the trip, Noah quieter, but smiling as he mentioned snorkeling and dolphins. I crouched to listen, willing my smile to stay in place, even as the knot in my stomach tightened. Vanessa stood in the entryway with her arms folded, her designer bag slung across her shoulder. Michael hung back near the door, his phone in hand as always. Grandma Lily said brightly. "We're going to swim every day in Mexico. The resort has 3 pools and a kids' club. You should come." Her innocent words cut the air open. I looked from her shining face to Noah's hopeful eyes, then up at Vanessa. Vanessa laughed softly, her tone dripping with disdain. "Sweetheart Grandma wouldn't really fit in at a place like that. Those resorts are for people who know how to relax and enjoy the luxury." The room went still. Michael said nothing, his eyes glued to the screen in his hand. The children glanced at me confused, waiting for me to respond. Heat rushed up my neck, but I forced my voice to stay even. "That's all right, Lily. You and Noah will have a wonderful time with your parents." But my composure was a thin shield, and inside me something cracked. They had dismissed me before quietly in private conversations or veiled suggestions. This time, the insult came openly in front of the children like I was a nuisance too unimportant to hide. I guided Lily and Noah toward the living room, offering them snacks and asking about school. My hands shook as I set the glasses of juice on the table. I could feel Vanessa's eyes on me, amused, confident that her words had found their mark. Michael eventually slid his phone into his pocket and cleared his throat. "Mom, don't take it personally. Vanessa just meant it might not be your style." I turned to him and asked quietly, "Then what is my style?" "Michael, staying behind to water plants while you go live the life I paid for." He flushed his mouth opening and closing without words. Vanessa stepped in quickly, her voice smooth as cream. "What he means is that we want time together as a nuclear family. You know, just the 4 of us. Just the 4 of us." The phrase rang in my head like a verdict. I watched Lily's brow furrow her eyes, darting between us. "But Grandma is family," she whispered. And for a heartbeat, I wanted to embrace her, to hold on to the only person in that room who still believed it. But the weight of Michael's silence and Vanessa's smirk pressed me down. That night after they left, I sat again in Thomas's old chair. Vanessa's words replayed cruel in their simplicity, not for people like her. My chest ached with humiliation, not just because of the insult, but because it had been spoken so freely with no fear of consequence. If they saw me as unworthy of joining them as someone to be mocked in front of the children, then what claim did they have to the life I had built, to the money I had bled away over years of sacrifice? My gaze drifted to the locked drawer in the office, the notepad with its damning total. $185,000. Vanessa's laugh seemed to echo through the walls of the house, sharp and cold. If I was not their family, if I was only a wallet, then I would make sure when the time came that nothing of mine would ever belong to them. Not this house. Not what Thomas left me. Not my future. I leaned back into the chair and closed my eyes, my heart steadying with a new clarity. They could go to Mexico, they could sip their cocktails and lounge by their pools, but they would not do it on my back again. The fireworks of New Year's had already faded, but in the silence of that winter night, I felt something ignite inside me. A resolve I had never allowed myself to name. The next Monday morning, I called Patricia back. My voice was steady in a way that surprised me. "I want to list the house," I told her. She asked if I was certain, and for the first time in years, I answered without hesitation. Yes. By Tuesday, the photographer came walking through each room with his wide-angle lens, while I stood off to the side, arms folded tight. I had polished the floors, rearranged the furniture, clipped fresh roses from the garden. It was strange preparing the house not for family, but for strangers who would never know the years of dinners and arguments and birthdays it had held. The listing went live that Thursday afternoon. By Friday morning, Patricia called me, her voice nearly breathless. "Eleanor, we already have 3 offers, all above asking. One of them is cash." Cash. The word hummed through me, bright and unreal. How much, I asked, pressing the phone to my ear as if it might vanish. $1,075,000, she said. They want to close in 30 days. I sat down hard at the kitchen table, the same one where I had written checks to bail Michael out over and over. My fingers traced the worn wood grain as Patricia spoke, outlining timelines and inspections and escrow. Her words blurred. All I could hear was the number. More money than I had ever held enough to buy freedom outright. I signed the papers that evening. The pen did not shake in my hand. Each stroke felt like lifting a stone off my chest. When it was done, I placed the contract neatly back into the folder and set it on the counter. I looked around the kitchen, the cabinets I had painted with Thomas, the window over the sink, where the light had once hit his face as he laughed. It was no longer a home. It was a transaction, and it was complete. 2 days later, my phone rang again. Michael. I considered letting it ring, but something inside me wanted to hear what he would say. Mom. He started, his voice sharp, already trembling with panic. Patricia called me. She told me the house is under contract. Is that true? Yes, I answered. You can't sell it. You can't just sell the house. Why not? Because we need you here. The kids need you. We need you close. I closed my eyes, the weight of his words pressing into me. We need you. Not we love you. Not we'll miss you. Need. Always need. You don't need me, Michael. You need money. There was silence on the other end. Then his voice broke through, louder now. That's not fair. This is our family home. We celebrated everything there. Dad's memory is in that house. Don't you care about that? I stood at the window looking out at the garden where the winter frost clung to the roses. I cared so much it had hollowed me out, but they never did. Your father's memory is with me, I said softly. It's not in the drywall or the bricks, and I won't let that memory be used as leverage anymore. Michael cursed under his breath, then tried again, this time pleading, Mom, just give it some time. Don't rush. Let's talk about this. I already have. He inhaled sharply, his frustration crackling through the line. Vanessa thinks you're being reckless. You don't even know where you'll go. That's my decision, Michael, not hers. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a voice stripped of patience, he said, If you sell that house, you're cutting yourself off from us. Don't expect us to come running when you regret it. The words should have hurt. Instead, they landed with a dull thud. I had already been cut off years ago, the moment I became only a wallet in his eyes. I hung up before he could say anything else. My hand shook, but my chest felt strangely light. That evening, I walked the rooms again, touching the walls, the stair railing, the door frame where Michael's height had once been marked in pencil. The memories rose and fell like waves, but they no longer anchored me. They were just echoes now. In the living room, I stood before Thomas's picture once more. I whispered to him what I had not said aloud in years. I'm leaving, Tom. I should have done it sooner. The house felt quiet, waiting. For the first time in a long time, so did I. By late February, the papers were signed, the movers had hauled away the last of my boxes, and the Sacramento house belonged to someone else. I drove north along Highway 1, the ocean stretching wide and gray on my left, the cliffs cutting sharp against the horizon. When I reached Mendocino, fog rolled across the rooftops like a veil. The cottage waited for me at the end of a narrow lane perched above the shoreline with its weathered shingles and blue trim. It was smaller than anything I had lived in since my 20s, but it was mine. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a living room with a fireplace, and a kitchen window that looked straight out at the Pacific. The garden was modest, overgrown with rosemary and lavender, but I could already see where I would plant tomatoes come spring. When I set the last box down in the living room, I stood in the silence and felt something I had not felt in decades. Freedom. I bought the cottage outright for $1.1 million, a number that still startled me when I saw it on the closing documents. After settling everything, I had nearly $400,000 left, money that would carry me through my later years, money that was mine alone. For the first time since Thomas died, I was not worried about who might come knocking about what new emergency might drain me further. The days settled into a rhythm quickly. In the mornings, I walked down to the cliffs breathing the salt air as gulls wheeled overhead. I unpacked slowly, arranging the shelves with books I had once taught from hanging pictures, where the light pleased me, not where guests might prefer. I cooked meals for one and felt no shame in it. Each evening I built a small fire, the crackle of wood filling the quiet space, and listened to the waves hammering the rocks below. On my 4th day in town, I stopped at the nursery to buy potting soil and a few seed packets. I struggled with the heavy bag when a woman with short silver hair stepped forward to help. "Need a hand with that?" she asked, her voice warm. I smiled gratefully. "Yes, thank you." She lifted the bag into my cart and extended her hand. "I'm Carol Martinez. You must be new here." "Eleanor Hayes," I replied. "Just moved from Sacramento." "Welcome," Carol said, her smile reaching her eyes. "If you're looking to meet people, there's a book club at the library Wednesday nights. Very casual, very friendly. You'd fit right in." I hesitated only a moment before nodding. "I'll be there." That Wednesday, I walked into the Mendocino Library with a dog-eared copy of the book under my arm. Around a table sat 7 women, all close to my age, their faces open and curious as they welcomed me. Carol introduced me quickly to the others. Susan Miller, 63, a retired nurse with a dry wit and quick laugh. Linda Brooks, 59, who had run a catering business for decades and still brought homemade cookies to every meeting. And Beth Parker, 62, a widow like me who had moved to town after losing her husband. The discussion of the novel flowed easily, voices overlapping, laughter breaking through when someone disagreed about a character's choices. Afterward, the conversation drifted to life in town, children, gardens, memories of work. No one asked me for anything but my opinion. No one leaned on me for help or money. As I walked home under the street lamps, the cool sea air brushing my face, I realized my cheeks ached from smiling. For years, my interactions had been laced with tension, with the anticipation of what Michael might ask for next, of what Vanessa might demand with a thin smile. That night, I had simply been Eleanor, a woman with thoughts, stories, and laughter of her own. Over the weeks, the friendships deepened. Carol stopped by with a basket of lemons from her tree. Susan called to check if I wanted to join her for a walk along the headlands. Linda invited me to her kitchen to learn a new bread recipe, our hands sticky with dough, as we laughed like schoolgirls. Beth came one afternoon with a bottle of wine, and we sat on my porch watching the sun sink into the ocean, speaking quietly of the husbands we had lost. For the first time in 15 years, I felt what family was supposed to feel like. Mutual, gentle, without expectation. One evening after another lively book club meeting, I lingered in the library as the others packed up. Carol touched my arm. "I'm glad you came to Mendocino," she said softly. You fit here." Her words stayed with me as I drove back to the cottage. I stood on the porch looking out at the dark line of the sea, the scent of rosemary rising from the garden, and felt a swell of gratitude. I had walked away from the house that had drained me from the son who only saw me as a bank, and here among women who had no claim on me, I had found what I thought I had lost forever. I stepped inside the fire, crackling low, and whispered into the quiet. Maybe this is what family truly is. One afternoon in early March, I was in the garden trimming back the lavender when a dark sedan pulled into my gravel driveway. The car idled for a moment, then a man in a pressed suit stepped out, carrying a slim leather briefcase. He was out of place against the rugged backdrop of Mendocino, his polished shoes sinking slightly in the dirt. "Are you Mrs. Hayes?" he asked, his tone formal. "Yes," I said cautiously, brushing soil from my gloves. "My name is Mark Lewis. I'm a private investigator. I've been hired to locate you on behalf of your son, Michael." The breath caught in my chest. Of course, Michael had found a way. He always did. Before I could respond, another car turned up the lane, Michael's SUV, dust swirling in its wake. He climbed out, his face drawn, his clothes rumpled, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. He looked older than 34, older than I had ever seen him. "Mom," he said, relief flooding his voice. "Thank God." I set my shears down slowly. "How did you find me?" Michael gestured vaguely toward the investigator. "I hired him. It wasn't cheap, but I didn't know what else to do." I stared at him, stunned. "You spent money, you don't have to track me down." "Because we're desperate," he blurted. "Mom, we're about to lose the house. We're 3 months behind on the mortgage. The bank has started foreclosure. If we don't catch up, they're going to take it." The words hung in the air, carried on the sound of the ocean below the cliff. He stepped closer, his voice breaking. "We need $45,000 to stop it. Just 45. Please." I folded my arms across my chest, willing myself not to shake. "Michael," I said quietly, "your desperation is not my emergency." He blinked as if I had slapped him. "Mom, you don't understand. The kids, Vanessa, will have nowhere to go. There are options," I said. "Bankruptcy, selling, downsizing, getting a second job. But I am not an option." He shook his head violently. "You can't mean that. You've always helped me." "Always. And what has it given me, Michael? Years of sacrifice, of debt, of being dismissed. You stood in my dining room and told your daughter I wasn't part of your family. Do you remember that?" He flinched, his mouth opening, but no words coming out. I went on, my voice steady now. "You only came here because you need money. If you truly wanted me, you would have found me long ago without a private investigator." His face hardened, anger pushing through the desperation. "I don't recognize you anymore." "Good," I said, "because the woman you used to recognize let herself be used. That part of me is gone." For a long moment, he just stood there, his shoulders slumping, as though the fight had left him. Then he turned back toward the SUV, muttering, "This isn't over." I watched him drive away, the sound of gravel crunching beneath his tires, until it faded into the distance. The investigator gave me a stiff nod, then followed him out. The garden was quiet again, the only sound the gulls overhead. My knees trembled, but my chest felt lighter than it had in years. I walked back inside and closed the door firmly behind me. Without hesitation, I reached for the phone on the counter and dialed the number of David Cohen, a lawyer in town recommended by Beth from the book club. He answered on the third ring, his voice calm and professional. "Mr. Cohen," I said, "this is Eleanor Hayes. I need to rewrite my will." The words tasted sharp and certain in my mouth. For the first time, I felt the power shift back into my hands. The following morning, I drove into town and parked outside a low brick building with a brass plaque that read, "David Cohen, Attorney at Law." The air smelled faintly of salt and eucalyptus, the coastal wind tugging at my scarf as I walked inside. David's office was neat and lined with shelves of thick legal books. He rose from behind his desk, a tall man with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, shaking my hand firmly, "please have a seat." I settled into the leather chair opposite him, my palms damp against my lap. I didn't waste time. "Mr. Cohen, I need to rewrite my will. I want my son and his wife removed completely." He leaned back slightly, studying me. "That is a serious decision. Can you tell me more about your circumstances?" I met his gaze steadily. "My husband Thomas worked his whole life to provide for us. Since his death, I've poured nearly $200,000 into supporting my son Michael and his family. I mortgaged my house twice, gave up years of savings, even retired early to provide free child care. They have taken everything without gratitude. Recently, they told my grandchildren that I wasn't part of their family. Then Michael found me here with a private investigator to ask for $45,000 to stop foreclosure on his house." David nodded slowly, his expression sympathetic but professional. "And you're certain you no longer wish to leave him anything?" "Yes. If I died tomorrow, he would see only the inheritance, not the mother he lost. I want to make sure what Thomas and I built goes to someone who deserves it." He tapped his pen against a notepad. "Do you wish to benefit your grandchildren?" My chest loosened slightly at the thought of Lily and Noah. Yes, but not through Michael. He would use them as an excuse, then spend every cent himself. "Then I recommend establishing a trust," David said. "We can create it so that Lily and Noah each inherit their portion directly, but only once they reach the age of 30. That way your son and his wife cannot control the funds while the children are minors. The trustee can be a neutral third party, someone whose sole responsibility is to manage the assets until the grandchildren come of age." I exhaled slowly, relief mixing with grief. "That sounds right. That sounds fair." "We will also prepare a letter of instruction," David continued, explaining your reasoning. "It is not legally required, but it can provide clarity if anyone challenges the will later." I nodded, feeling the weight of the decision settle into something solid. For years, I had been afraid to stand firm. Now at last, I was drawing a line no one could erase. David drafted the documents over the next hour, his pen moving swiftly, while I sat across from him staring at the sunlight slanting through the blinds. When he finished, he slid the pages across the desk. "This trust will provide equal shares to Lily and Noah released when they reach 30. Your estate, including the proceeds from your Sacramento home and your Mendocino cottage, will be placed under management until then. Michael Hayes and Vanessa Hayes are expressly disinherited. Do you understand and agree?" I lifted the pen, my hand steady. "Yes." I signed my name across the lines, each stroke of ink a quiet act of defiance. When the last signature was done, I set the pen down and felt a shiver move through me. David gathered the pages carefully. "You've made a very clear decision, Mrs. Hayes. Do you feel at peace with it?" I looked out the window at the curve of the street, at the people walking past with grocery bags and coffee cups living their ordinary lives. Peace wasn't the right word. It was justice. I turned back to him and said softly, "This is the last piece of fairness I can give Thomas. He built this life with his hands, and now I've made sure it will go to the grandchildren he loved, not to the son who squandered it." David inclined his head. "Then I believe you've done exactly what needed to be done." I rose, gathering my coat. As I stepped into the sharp Mendocino air, the ocean wind rushed against my face, and for the first time in years, I felt completely untethered. My family by blood had severed themselves from me, but I had secured a future for the only two who mattered. The rest I would keep for myself. It was a gray afternoon when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel outside my cottage. I had not been expecting anyone, and when I stepped onto the porch, the sight made my stomach clench. Michael's SUV stood crooked in the driveway, Vanessa climbing out beside him, her lips pressed tight, her eyes sharp with something between anger and desperation. Behind them, Lily and Noah tumbled out, their faces uncertain, caught between excitement at seeing me and confusion at their parents' strained voices. Mom Michael called, trying for calm but sounding ragged. "We need to talk." I stood with my arms crossed, the ocean wind tugging at my sweater. "You found me once with a detective. I suppose finding me again was easier." He winced, but walked closer, Vanessa following with her arms folded. Lily and Noah hovered near the car watching. "We drove up because this is serious," Michael said quickly. "We can work this out. We're family." I held his gaze. "You told me otherwise." "That was a mistake," he said, his voice tightening. "We said things wrong. But Mom, you can't do this. You can't cut us out." Vanessa stepped forward, her voice sharp as glass. "We are your family. You owe us." I felt a calm I hadn't known before settle over me. "You both told me I wasn't part of your family. That was the one honest thing you ever said." Lily shifted nervously, tugging on Noah's sleeve. "Grandma, what does she mean?" Noah whispered. Vanessa turned on them quickly. "Go wait in the car." "No," I said firmly. "They can hear this. They deserve to." Vanessa's face flushed. "Eleanor, stop being dramatic. You know you're making a huge mistake." The words poured out of her then, fast and bitter. "What good are you to us if you don't help? You sit here in this little cottage while we're drowning. You don't understand what it's like raising kids today, paying a mortgage, keeping up. If you won't help us, then what use are you?" The children's eyes widened, Noah stepping back as though struck. I felt something inside me break free. I walked closer until I stood only a few feet from them, my voice steady and clear. "Lily, Noah, I need you to hear me. I have written a new will. Everything I own, everything your grandfather and I built will be held in trust for the two of you. Not for your parents, for you." Michael's face drained of color. "Mom, you can't say that in front of them." I looked directly at him. "I can and I will, because it's the truth." Vanessa sputtered, her hands flying up. "You would do this to your own son." I turned my gaze to her. "I have done enough for my son. I mortgaged my future, gave him my savings, sacrificed everything. And he still told me I was not part of his family. You confirmed it. And now you stand here and say I have no use if I don't keep paying. That is not family." Michael opened his mouth, but no words came. His hands clenched at his sides, his shoulders slumped, and for once he had nothing to argue. Lily clutched Noah's arm, her small voice carrying in the salt air. "Grandma, does that mean you'll always be with us even if—" I crouched to her level, my hand brushing her cheek. "It means you will always be cared for. It means what your grandfather worked for will belong to you when you are grown, not to anyone else." Tears welled in her eyes, and she threw her arms around my neck. Noah leaned against me, too silent but steady, his face pressed into my shoulder. Behind them, Vanessa muttered, "This is insanity. She'll regret it." Michael stared at the ground, his lips moving but no sound coming out. He looked hollow, as if the weight of my words had finally landed where no lecture or refusal ever had. I rose slowly, holding Lily's hand in mine, my other resting on Noah's shoulder. I looked at the two of them, then at their parents. I am not your bank. I am not your safety net. I am a mother and a grandmother, and I have finally chosen to protect what is left of me for those who might still value it. The waves crashed hard against the cliffs below as silence fell over the driveway. Michael's mouth opened once more, for the first time in years, and I answered. 6 months passed, and with each tide that rolled in against the cliffs, I felt the distance from my old life grow wider. Mendocino had become more than just a place to live. It was the breath I had been holding for years, finally let go. The mornings began with the call of gulls and the soft hiss of waves. I walked the same winding path down to the overlook, sometimes with Carol at my side, sometimes alone, always with the ocean steady beneath me. The cottage had settled into itself around me. The walls carried no echoes of arguments or shame, only the hum of quiet evenings and the smell of paint drying on new canvases. My little studio overlooked the water, the light spilling across the floor in shades that shifted with every passing cloud. I painted the horizon again and again, each time a little different, as if I were learning a language I had once forgotten. The book club became my circle, my chosen family. On Wednesday nights, I laughed at Linda's sharp jokes, listened to Susan's stories from decades in nursing, and leaned into the companionship of women who asked for nothing except that I bring myself. Beth sometimes stayed afterward, and together we drank tea on my porch, speaking of grief and of beginnings that came when we thought we were too old for them. Every few weeks, Lily and Noah came with Vanessa, sometimes with Michael, if he could get away from work. They piled out of the car with shy smiles that bloomed into bright laughter once they ran into my arms. Lily always asked to see my newest paintings, her small fingers trailing the edges of the canvas with awe. Noah preferred the garden, where he inspected the tomato vines and proudly pointed out each ripe fruit. One afternoon in late summer, I spread out watercolor supplies on the kitchen table and showed Lily how to mix the blues to capture the ocean's depth. She leaned close, her tongue peeking out in concentration as she brushed color across the paper. "Grandma," she whispered, "when I grow up, can I be an artist like you?" "You can be anything," I told her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You already see the world like one." Noah, who had been quiet, set down his brush and looked at me. "Grandma, Daddy says you don't like him anymore. Is that true?" The question landed softly but firm, the way only a child's honesty can. I reached across the table and took his hand. "I love your father because he is my son," I said gently. "But love does not mean I can give him everything. Sometimes loving someone means telling them no." He nodded slowly, his eyes searching mine. Then he gave a small smile, as if he understood more than his years should allow. I knew from others in town that Michael and Vanessa were renting a duplex in Stockton now. Michael worked days at a logistics company and nights delivering food. Vanessa had taken a part-time job at a retail store. The shine they had once tried to polish so brightly had dulled. They called less visited only when the children begged. When they did appear, Vanessa's tone was clipped but restrained, and Michael seemed tired more than angry. The distance between us had hardened into something permanent, something I could live with. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, in a blaze of gold and crimson, I sat on the porch with my journal. The children's laughter from their last visit still rang in my memory bright and untangled. I thought of Thomas, of the years we had struggled and built, of the sacrifices I had made after he was gone. For so long I had believed those sacrifices tied me to my family. In truth, they had only buried me under expectation. Now I had given the future to the two who might still carry it with respect. The trust was locked, the will signed, and nothing could take that from them. Michael and Vanessa might rage or plead, but they could not undo it. And for the first time, I felt that Thomas's work and mine had not been wasted. The waves crashed harder that night, and I smiled into the wind. I was no longer a bank, no longer a ghost in my own home. I was a woman living by the sea, painting, reading, laughing with friends, watching her grandchildren grow with the knowledge that their future was secure. I had given myself back the one gift I had denied too long: peace. And I had given my grandchildren something even greater: a future free from the grasp of those who once called me an outsider. If one day your own family tells you that you do not belong, what would you do?